Okay, let's talk about amphibians. These are in the second of the evolutionary step. It goes fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals. So what makes an amphibian? Well, there's 5 main characteristics. They have lungs, they have legs, they have a double loop circulatory system, a partially divided heart, which means, the oxygen and deoxygenated blood still mix, and they have a cutaneous respiratory system. What does that mean? They can breathe through their skin. That's pretty cool. Amphibians can thrive on land, but they need to be near a water source. Their eggs are not watertight, so they have to lay their eggs near water. Amphibians, we know, descended from lobe fish. In fact, there's not a whole lot of lobe fish, only 5 types. So most of them are amphibians. By the way, if you see beautifully colored frogs like this, they're poisonous. Don't touch them. Okay, so how do they move and respond to the environment? So 1, they have a skeletal system that is internal. So they have an endoskeleton. These endoskeletons are jointed. They have long limbs that are fused to thick bones, and they're able to do things like jump. Their hips are actually thick so that they can absorb the impact of landing without breaking a hip. Crazy, right? So they also have sensory organs. The sense of sight and hearing are extremely well developed. And that's necessary because they have to stay away from predators. Because anything from birds to fish, everybody wants to eat these guys. Their eyes are covered with a transparent membrane. We would call it an eyelid, but this is a movable membrane. And this nocturnal membrane is actually allows for the eye to stay moist, but it's not a complete covering. It's still allowing light in even when it's closed. Their ear is actually what we know as a tympanic membrane. We just have what we would consider the eardrum on the outside of them. So you actually cannot, it doesn't have a hole opening into the ear. It's the tympanic membrane right on the outside. It's able to breathe through its skin for some of them. It can obtain oxygen through their skin. Because their skin allows for oxygen exchange, even though they have a bag-like organ, what we would consider kind of a lung-like organ, they still obtain oxygen through their skin. They also obtain a lot of other things through their skin. Because their skin is that semi-permeable membrane, it actually doesn't stop toxins from coming in. If the frogs start dying, that's the first sign that there's a toxin within the environment because they're so susceptible to it. This cutaneous respiratory does allow for them to survive. Some salamanders to live without lungs. Could you imagine not needing your lungs? Guess they're not going to get a respiratory illness. However, they have mucus glands that allow for this air exchange to happen. There are some funguses that will affect this mucus gland and will not allow for mucus secretion. If that would happen to stop, then those organisms suffocate. Their circulatory system is with a partially divided heart. Remember, the septum divides the right and left sides, but it doesn't completely divide it in a frog's heart. The bottom chambers are not divided, and this is where the oxygen-rich and the oxygen-deficient blood mixes together. However, we do have a closed circulatory system, so the blood doesn't just pump out to the body and flow back to it. It stays in the arteries, veins, and capillaries with just a little bit of mixture. Because of this mixture, oxygen-poor blood enters the right atrium of the heart. Oxygen-rich blood enters the left atrium of the heart. Both empty into a single ventricle. This is unlike our heart that has a 4-chambered heart, so we have a right and left atria and right and left ventricle. The shape of the ventricle allows for oxygen-rich blood to stay in one side, while the oxygen-poor blood goes to the lungs. Some have a spiral valve, which keeps the two separated and streamlined between them. As we can see here, this is our fish, our amphibian, and this is mostly our birds and mammals. So as we can see here, our oxygen poor blood is coming in, while our oxygen rich blood, and then it mixes here and goes out and back. The circulatory loop connects. So the good thing is that the pulmonary vein carries oxygen rich blood, which it does in ours too, and the pulmonary artery carries oxygen poor blood. This can be pumped to the tissues under a high pressure. This pressurized system allows for the exchange of gases within each of the cells through the capillary systems. So let's talk about the different types of amphibians. One is a salamander, as we have pictured here, the mole salamander. Salamanders have long tails and smooth, moist skin. There's about 400 species of them. They can't stay away from water for long periods of time, and they don't do really well in dry areas. They have long tongues to catch their prey, almost like a frog. They reproduce laying eggs in the water, and they usually fertilize externally, not internally, even though a couple do. They're usually born with gills and will go through a metamorphosis phase, where they're juveniles and don't really look like the adults, and then all of a sudden they transform, not into a beautiful butterfly, but a salamander in this case. The Caecilians, these guys are burrowing amphibians. Kind of looks like a big old mess of blue worms or coil of snakes. The Caecilians have small bony scales embedded in their skin. They're legless, and they're typically found in swamps and tropical regions. For this, most of them eat worms and other invertebrates. They're able to catch and release their prey, and they reproduce when the males deposit the sperms directly into the females. And this is a female giving live birth. That's pretty sweet. Frogs and toads are probably the most common. There's about 4,000 species of frogs and toads. Most frogs wait for their prey to pass by and then stick their tongue out, grasping them. The frog's body is adapted for jumping. While toads are similar to frogs, they have a squatted body and shorter legs. Toads also have rough skin that's covered in bumps. And toads are toxic. They're secreting something that doesn't necessarily make them delectable for all species. To reproduce, both need water. The females will release their eggs and the male will fertilize them externally. They will develop into a tadpole state. This is a larvae. The tadpoles can breathe through gills. Those gills will go away as they get older, and they go through a process we call metamorphosis. This will allow them to go into adulthood. Frogs need to be near the water, while toads can move away. Both need the water for reproduction. Toads are what we see in our yards. Toads are also poisonous, so a lot of times birds will catch them, rip them open, and suck their little guts out. While some frogs, the more colorful ones, are also poisonous and secrete a poison to prevent their predators from eating them. However, not all frogs are poisonous, but all toads are.